Welcome, everybody. Today is Tuesday, which is Future of Entertainment Day on Let's Do Lunch. Today is our 73rd episode of Let's Do Lunch. Can't believe it. We started this, as everybody knows, with when the pandemic broke out and everyone started working from home. And now we're 73 episodes in. I've had a lot of amazing guests on the show since we started. All right, as a reminder, folks, we will have our chat open, so please feel free to introduce yourselves. You can put a little blurb in about what you're working on, put your LinkedIn in if you'd like. When you do that, as Digital Media Wire just wrote in the chat, make sure to select all panelists and attendees. The drop-down is set just at all panelists right now, so you need to change it to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your entries. Also, if you have questions for the panel, please put them in the Q&A, which is just to the left of the chat, so that our speakers can see your questions. All right, so let's go to the show today. We have a fantastic show today. We have Ryan Ford. Ryan is Executive Vice President and Chief Creative Officer at the Cashmere Agency, which is a lifestyle marketing collective and one of Ad Age's 2020 agencies to watch. They've also been the winner of Multicultural Agency of the Year. Welcome, Ryan. And with Ryan today is David Bloom. David is senior contributor at Forbes and Tube Filter. Welcome, guys. I'll let you guys take it over.
Glad to be here. Thank you. And
hey, what's going on?
Not nearly enough here in the middle of the quarantine and all that stuff, but I am delighted to be with you, Ryan, despite your youthful misadventures in the Division I football arena that sent you to Kansas, of all places, our arch rivals.
Yeah, Rock Chalk Jayhawk.
Rock Chalk, yeah. Go Tigers. But we'll overlook the youthful indiscretions and move on to the important stuff that you've been doing in the time since then. And talk a little bit about Cashmere. Let's start, I guess. Cashmere's got its hands in a lot of different things, and I think it's a little difficult for people of limited imagination to even keep track of it all. But run down everything you guys do, because some of it's not as common. Well, it wasn't as common. I think it's probably a little more common now, but you guys have your hands in a lot of different sort of related things as an agency, that very broad portmanteau. So talk about all the things you guys do.
Well, I think that to understand Cashmere is to understand our passion and our allegiance to culture, right? So what we do is less about the manifestations that, the marketing manifestations that come alive, and it's more about that North Star, and that North Star for us is culture, and just not only understanding culture, but celebrating and honoring and protecting that culture as well. And because we have such an allegiance to it, then now the manifestations or the silos or the components of the agency really speak to being able to not just impact culture, but how to create culture along with our brand and studio and network partners. So that breaks down into numerous areas, but the focus of those areas is strategy, social, PR, production, and influencers. So, everything that we're doing comes alive, whether it's a screening, whether it's a party, whether it's a digital activation, or whether it's an Instagram campaign, comes to life with some mix of all of those different components.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, though, this notion of culture. I mean, you're there in your secure, undisclosed location with your backdrop of your sneaker wall, and that right. is one manifestation of a pretty recent, I think, expression of culture. I mean, there are probably people collecting sneakers back in the Chuck days, but I don't really think it's become a thing until probably the last 8-10 years, right? I mean, Fairfax transformed from a heavily Jewish neighborhood with kosher delis to streetwear and sneakers about in the last several years. I mean, that's one expression of really, I think, a transformative kind of street culture that's really taken off. How do you bring that into big brands like, I mean, Adidas obviously makes shoes, but it doesn't just make shoes. It does things with people. You were showing off your Snoop Dogg Adidas crossover, which I thought was pretty cool, and they were made out of hemp, right?
Right,
So,
right. Yeah, I mean, you're speaking about a lot of things, and we can unpack that. I think first that sneaker culture has become part of popular culture and mainstream culture, right? And there's a million reasons for that. However, sneaker culture it's far from just a couple of years old, right? Like sneaker culture comes out of hip hop culture, it comes out of African American culture, urban culture, athletic culture, and from whether it's Michael Jordan and his line with Nike, or Yeezy and Kanye's line with Adidas Yeezy. It has different manifestations throughout the years. Now, before Fairfax, it was other places on Melrose, like Sporty LA, that you could go and find the retro sneakers, the kinds that were limited edition that you couldn't find anywhere else. I think what you're seeing now is you're seeing a proliferation of it, partially because of the distribution channels that are now there for it, whether it's apps like GOAT or StockX, whether it's other kind of brick and mortar retailers.
Right.
What used to be very coveted and limited are now very available if you got the money, that is, right?
Yeah.
So I've always had a lot of sneakers. I've definitely upped it over the years, but sneakers have, since I was a kid, are always of huge importance to me. From my first pair of Jordan 1s back in 1984 or 85, whenever that was, like, that I went to bed in that night when my aunt bought them for me, up until now. And it's funny because sneaker culture now comes across in different places, right? In different times, in places that sneaker culture didn't used to be able to come into, right? For instance, like, if you're dressing up to go to a award show or an important meeting now, if you have that limited edition pair of Jordans or Yeezys, or even higher end like Fear of God or Balenciagas or something, that pair of sneakers that you have can say so much more than the dress shoes of a generation ago.
Right. Yeah. It's a little bit like talking to a British person who can figure out exactly where you grew up, what your level of education was, what your parents did for a living based on your accent. You look at the shoes. If you're a serious sneakerhead, you can kind of say, oh, he's da-da-da because he's got that Balenciaga or whatever, that there was 300 shoes that were put out or pairs that were put out, that kind of thing. But how do you infuse things like that into the work that you do for a big brand like BMW? Let's talk a little bit about your work with BMW and how you bring culture to a conversation about a big German car maker.
Yeah, well, we're lucky enough at Cashmere, fortunate enough to be the multicultural diversity agency of record for BMW North America. And I don't think BMW is any different than any other brand that we work with in trying to understand what the cultural nuances are in that moment, right? And these days, marketing of your automobile or of your movie or of your TV show or of your, frozen pizza or of your sneaker all can be enhanced if you're understanding what's happening in culture at that moment, especially, and how you are relevant not to just someone's refrigerator or their closet or their driveway, but you're relevant to someone's worldview and their lifestyle, right? So what we do with BMW is multifaceted. We're, number one, making sure that their marketing communications can speak to different audiences, whether that's African American, whether it's Hispanic, whether it's Asian American, in a way that's really aligned with the brand ethos, as well as culturally the level of conversations that are happening in those communities. And those are far from monolithic communities as well. There's nuances versus of Hispanics that live in Southern California versus Hispanics that live in Southern Florida, for instance, right? Or Asian American, Korean American communities in Los Angeles versus Southeast Asian communities of the Midwest, right? So there's a lot of different nuances there that we're always passionate and focused on understanding, and then helping BMW just get their marketing messages across to those communities, right? But also, it's a two-way conversation, letting BMW as well as all of our clients understand what's important to those communities, what lights them up, what makes them tick, where those communities exist, right? Not just a neighborhood in LA, but where they exist online. And again, how we can impact and create culture.
That's an interesting question. Of course, that people are able to find their tribe online and in ways that they couldn't do 30 years ago. And it's ever more balkanized and cut up. It also gives you a chance to really sort of narrow in and connect with somebody wherever they may be. I'm curious, this has been an extraordinary time around questions of racial justice, finally addressing some of the, as they've called it, the original sin of the American experiment, and trying to deal with that. How has the push, the protests, the push for more accountability with police, how has the conversation about representation evolved for you all as an agency that's specifically about connecting brands with these communities that have been most in the spotlight?
I think, well, first of all, we're a very unique agency from the standpoint of those issues always made their way into our workplace, and those issues were talked about not just as fodder around the water cooler for certain segments of our team, which numbers near 100, but were the subject matter of sharing cares and town halls that we do internally. Whether or not issues dealt directly with any of our clients, right? These are issues that matter to us as human beings, and we don't cease being those human beings. Many of us are multicultural. 75%, in fact, of Cashmere is multicultural. That you don't cease being that when you're at work or you're in a pitch meeting or you're on a Zoom call, right? These are things that are important to us. These are things that are important to culture. We had initiatives that we have launched a long time ago that really speak to what's going on in the world today, because it wasn't a branding exercise for us. It was just who we are.
Right.
In last year, or in 2018, we launched something called Get Louder around the midterms. And that was an initiative that we partnered with Render and our frequent collaborator, Dr. Rob Biko Baker, around ensuring that we had a department or a division or an initiative, I should say, that it was specifically politically minded, right? That could come alive in different ways. Number one, come alive with brands like Ben & Jerry's, and we helped launch their Justice Remixed flavor of ice cream, where a big portion of the proceeds went to change.org and also went to criminal justice reform. Ben & Jerry's just stays active in various spaces, and kudos to them. But we were also able to help certain initiatives that took the form of PACs that were focused on getting younger, non-college African Americans to actually get involved in the electoral process, get involved in voting, right? We were involved in initiatives in the state of Florida to get people to vote for ex-felons to get the right to vote.
Right, that was a big issue in that state that's still sort of being unpacked, as I understand, because the legislature
absolutely
doesn't want something like 1 million people there to be able to vote. So it's really been interesting.
Absolutely. And so that's just a world that we've always lived in. And also, we've always been a part of, not always, but over the past, half decade, been involved in the Brown and Black Presidential Forum. When this year on Martin Luther King Day in Iowa, during the Iowa caucuses, we actually produced a forum along with Vice Media, where we had Biden and Sanders and Warren and 12 other, I think it was 11 or 12 other candidates, come and talk about issues in the political realm that are impacting young African Americans, Hispanics, and other people of color. So we aren't just looking at this for how we can help brands sell products or push initiatives. We're looking at it from a total lifestyle understanding, worldview, and perspective, and how we see the world. And if you're saying that sneakers are important to you, then these other things have to be important to you as well, because these are all the things that make up our world.
Yeah. I just a quick interjection for everybody. John Pattison, who I've known a long time, has a broader question about this, but I also note that you have several fans out there for some of the work you guys did with Boondocks for Sony. And I guess Boondocks is coming back. Thank goodness for that. I mean, we need more Boondocks in the world, I think. But you went back to Iowa, which is where you're from. You're a Des Moines guy. So that must have been fun to have that thing there tied to their quadrennial election celebration. But John asks, how has the pandemic affected Cashmere since productions disappeared and talent agencies have been crushed, which is a brutal way to put it. This is not wrong. It seems digital's always been a big part of your workflow. Has it increased ever more, and in what ways?
I think that by the nature of us just, being hustlers and coming from culture backgrounds and not so much maybe agency backgrounds that may have been a little bit archaic in their form and their build, we've always had a quite diverse portfolio of stuff that we are working on. And while we do have a lot of AOR clients, agency of record clients, that we're very excited about, and we love that they believe in us to bring their help bring their products and their views to the world, we also have been fortunate enough, I guess, even before the pandemic in this changing agency landscape, to always have a number of different projects that we're working on. A lot of those are in TV and film, as was rightfully pointed out. And we're also fortunate enough at Cashmere that we had made great inroads in working with the streaming outlets, right? Whether that was Disney Plus or Apple TV Plus or Hulu or Netflix or Amazon Prime Video. And while production, obviously rightfully called out, has stopped, there's no lack of new content that's coming out, right? As well as you see some of the studios like Universal taking some of their titles and making them available on demand, right? So it's definitely a changing space, but there is certainly no lack of content. We've also been able to gain new opportunities with new clients, or broader opportunities with current clients like DoorDash to actually engage on different levels during this time. Obviously, food delivery, had been growing with DoorDash and Grubhub and Uber Eats and the lot, and we had been fortunate enough to have worked with all of those titles, all those brands in the past. And but right now we're ordering more food than ever. The needs of those people around those types of services are more than ever. But also there's some very unique aspects of how those businesses are done, right? Where all of the sudden a food delivery person, it becomes an essential worker on many levels. And if you're living in LA and you're seeing who is occupying those roles, they're oftentimes people of color, oftentimes young people of color. So there's a whole host of different challenges that come with that. And those types of food delivery services, where they, are very a tactile thing, right? Someone's bringing something to you, right? The interaction around it and a lot of the conversation around it is happening in the digital space, in the social space, right?
Because you got to be able to both recruit. You got to be able to recruit delivery people on the one side to keep that thing going, because there's a bigger need than ever, and you got to be able to recruit customers on the other. And it's a really brutal battle for market share, right? So, how are you able to produce programming? Is it mostly for online, social media, digital outlets that you're producing? How are you doing that, just from a production pipeline process?
Well, our production pipeline is very much social focused, right? So we're creating assets, both, everything from kind of more highly produced content that may show up as a commercial on TV, as well as a pre-roll on YouTube, down to something as simple as a motion graphic for a TV show that's coming out or a movie that's coming out. So our staff, right, is working remotely. As are many in the marketing and advertising and entertainment spaces. But luckily, the grand majority of our work was digital. Also, we were doing a lot in the experiential space, the IRL experiential space. And very quickly, we saw the markers of what was happening in culture, not just from having to be in our homes because of quarantine, but also what was starting to connect, right? Whether it was the versus hip hop beat battles or virtual DJ appearances and gigs like that, that saw a different type of engagement, a different type of interaction than was happening pre-quarantine. So we launched a division called Nice Sweater, get it, Cashmere, Nice Sweater. And that division really focuses in on digital experiences. We believe, and I don't think we have to be much deep soothsayers to come up with this assertion, but that even when we're out of quarantine, even when there's a vaccine for COVID and we can go back about our lives, that those lives are going to be forever changed. And while hopefully we will return to sporting events and concerts and food festivals and all that, that there's a very important and element of that, which used to be ancillary and now it's become one of the focal points, which is how are you interacting with even broader audiences that are exponentially bigger through digital and through social. That's what Nice Sweater focuses on.
I mean, because you've got more adoption by people. I mean, I tell people we've accelerated adoption in so many areas. It's been this thing where, you know, now your grandmother knows how to use Zoom and your aunt is using TikTok. And so it's a real transformation, I think, in terms of comfort levels that people who never would have taken those things on now have. A couple quick notes for folks. We're going to have a survey in a few minutes. If you have a question, Ebony was kind enough to put hers in the Q&A. Put your questions there. And I love it when the folks in the chat area put their little LinkedIn connection in there so that, and share that out so that people can connect on here so we can build a broader community here and have a spirited conversation about where we're going, what we're doing. So share your LinkedIn and with folks, and since we can't do the old style business card thing, let's do the LinkedIn. That's very modern. And speaking of TikTok and LinkedIn, looks like Microsoft might acquire them. I'm sort of curious, Ryan, just from your perspective as somebody who does a lot of influencer marketing or oversees a lot of influencer marketing campaigns, what would a Microsoft-owned TikTok, at least in the US, Canada, and Australia, and New Zealand, look like? What would that do for Microsoft? Any thoughts about that? I'm curious. Well, I'd love to hear what people in the room have to think as well, because I'm fascinated by what they could do.
Well, I think TikTok is, no matter who owns it, is going to look like pretty much it looks like now. I don't think it would be massively changed. I think perhaps Microsoft could integrate it into Xbox and Xbox Live, perhaps, as well as, you know, other places that Microsoft is showing up. But I think that, you know, we're used to seeing these social platforms come out of nowhere and then either do, you know, go public or get acquired. We saw that with Instagram and Facebook. We saw it with WhatsApp and Facebook. We saw it with Snapchat just coming out and then going public and all of that, right? So I think every couple of years you're going to be seeing these new rocket ship platforms because they give us what we need in that moment at that time. I think that some of but there's a lot of politics surrounding the TikTok and as well as some other platforms as they start coming out from other countries, right? Like obviously Chinese owned TikTok, and then how people are utilizing those platforms. I mean, we saw, you know, to a great extent, the level of impact, I would call it tremendously negative impact, that a group like Cambridge Analytica had, working with the Trump campaign, and their usage, nefarious, if you will, usage of platforms like Facebook without some of the guardrails that are there now. So these platforms can be used for politics on either side, or they can be used to just get people involved in politics, no matter in a bipartisan way. But obviously, there are large groups on TikTok that are using it for good, I would say, right, as of now, that are positioning themselves as anti-Trump, right, quite frankly. And then that's why we start seeing these politically charged conversations around ownership and around privacy rights. This isn't an anomaly, I don't think. I think this is the way the world is. There's always been political conversation around large media platforms, right? That's why we have the FCC and some of that stuff in place. And you know, on some level, they don't have the same type of regulation abilities around these new digital platforms, especially if they're owned overseas or somewhere, right? So like, this is like, we've just seen the tip of the iceberg on this thing, and I would expect far more conversation around TikTok as well as other social media platforms as we near the election, but also from here on out. You know what I mean? These aren't any different issues. Like, they manifest themselves differently, but you see these, like William Randolph Hearst went through issues like this, right? Like, you know, how many,
well,
how many people
famously,
can you
yeah, right. I mean, but famously, like he said to his correspondent in Cuba, "You supply the stories, I'll supply the war," around the Spanish-American War and the U.S. invasion of Cuba that led to us, you know, beating up on a fading imperial power and taking over the Philippines for 50 years. But you know, Hearst was very political. You're right. I mean, that's
So it's nothing new, whether it's Fox News and CNN and MSNBC, or whether it's TikTok and Facebook, or whatever the next platform is that we're all going to be utilizing. They can be used for politics, both good and bad. And you know, our Get Louder initiative, which I spoke about before, is meant to utilize our powers for good, meaning that we have a group of nearly 100 young creators, many of whom are creators of color. And again, there's things that we are passionate about in our lives, aside from the brands that we purchase and the movies and TV that we watch, and the you know, the electronic devices that we have. And we have an apparatus that enables us to activate for some of those things that we're passionate about.
sure. Ebony Tay thoughtfully adds a couple of interesting questions. Can you obtain, how do you obtain leads leading to specific conversions, especially with diversity films or TV? She appreciates this case studies because of, as her quote, all-female Black producing team looks at marketing, unquote. And you've done things like Black Panther, Atlanta, Donald Glover's fantastic show, Get Out, the spectacular hit that Jordan Peele put together, hit movie, horror thriller. So you've had a chance to help market some of the biggest hits by noted African-American creators, period. Right. So any tips for Ebony Tay as she's trying to make her way?
Well, I think that you rightly speak about the content that we've had the opportunity to help market, right, and help connect. And I think what's very unique about 2020 and beyond is just the amount of young content creators of color, right? Whether it's some of the ones you mentioned, whether it's Jordan Peele or Donald Glover or Issa Rae or Ryan Coogler or Kenya Barris. I mean, the list kind of goes on to who's who right now of people that are creating content. Yeah, absolutely. That are creating content, and then creating that content to connect with broad audience, but obviously creating the content that speaks very specifically in a nuanced way to a core community. And as there becomes more outlets for this content, I just mentioned all the streamers that didn't even exist a decade ago. There's more opportunity for the content, and there's more opportunity for people to help create the content. As far as on the production side, there's more opportunity for people that write scripts or do lighting or run craft services. There's also more opportunities for agencies that do key art or social media or experiential. And there's different ways to answer the question. There's different ways that we obtain leads. Fortunately for us, we've done a lot of good work and have a lot of really impressive case studies, because we've had a lot of different networks and studios and streamers believe in us and believe that we have something unique in order to connect with these audiences. But also some of the stuff was obtained originally just the old-fashioned way. It's cold calling, like hearing about something in Deadline or Hollywood Reporter and calling a studio or calling a network and saying, hey, you have this TV show coming out about this subject matter, or we saw that you just announced that this type of this particular movie or show is going into development, and we would love to have you come in and talk to you more about Cashmere and what we do. It was unusual in the frame that there wasn't a lot of people making contact with networks and studios for those types of shows, right?
You didn't have that much competition, really? Is that what you're saying? That though there was a great opportunity, that there weren't agencies that could make the pitch the way you guys could, or not a lot of them that could make that pitch?
I think it's that I think it's that just times were changing and we were just a little bit ahead of the curve, right? Like, I think that's all it was, right? We also happen to know a lot of the content creators that I just spoke about. So sometimes those content creators, be it maybe RZA from the Wu-Tang or Snoop Dogg, will bring us in and say, hey, can you find a place that Cashmere can perhaps lend a hand in bringing this to life, because they want to see those projects successful as well. So I wish there was some, proprietary algorithm that I had that could tell you how we were the science behind generating leads. It was just finding a number and calling up and saying like, hey, who runs your marketing? I think even more so than not being any competition, because there's plenty of competition all the time for everything that we work on. Please believe that. And we have to scrape and fight for every opportunity that we have, both big and small. But I think that what really worked well for us is we didn't know the rules, right? We didn't know like how you're supposed to obtain an RFP or how you're going to get briefed, so we just like did it the old-fashioned way. We just called up and said, hey, we have something exciting and we feel like we can help bring some value for this particular project. And I think that, just the hunger there, or the level of disruption, even as we work to obtain those opportunities, was somewhat a breath of fresh air to partners that we ended up working with.
So timing is everything, but also I think the old line is fortune favors the prepared mind. So you guys were ready to roll too.
I believe Sugar Free, the famous rapper from Mona, said it a little better. He said, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
He said it certainly much more interestingly, but it was a 200-year-old line. I think this is a good time to put up the poll. We have a brief poll, as we do every one of these things. A few questions. Please take a moment to help give us a sense of the spirit of the room. The Zeitraum, I think, would be the Germanish sort of thing to say, including how many influencer marketing campaigns you've been part of, how many experiential marketing campaigns has your company been part of, how soon before we have regular experiential marketing and other live in-person events again? And finally, how many sneakers do you own? I want to find out how many people are sneakerheads like our esteemed guest of honor today. So please just take a couple minutes, check those off. We'll circle back in about 10 minutes. Any more questions, please put them in Q&A. And also, again, lob in your LinkedIn connection and what you do so people can connect and exchange virtual business cards. And we'll go from there. So at this point, I'm interested. You talked about worldview and lifestyle relevancy early in our conversation, and what that means. And is it really just about casting about to find how you match up with some key audiences that really hadn't been well addressed in sort of traditional marketing approaches? Is that really the secret to success, is connecting with unconnected or underconnected communities?
I think you see that happening just broadly right now. If you look at the celebration around Juneteenth, right? A holiday that most people, I would say the great majority of people, had never heard of, or even if they had heard of it, they just didn't know what it was.
John Oliver actually in his wonderful episode Sunday Night brought out a stat that 48% of Americans had never heard of it, or barely heard of Juneteenth, but certainly didn't know what it was. I spent 5 years in Texas, so I got a little bit more, and covering politics, so I got a little bit more, but you're right, it's crazy. So all of a sudden, finally, people are like, oh, Juneteenth, that's kind of a deal. The fact that, it's an important thing, and it's good to hear. But,
right, I mean, yes, absolutely, and it is an important holiday and celebration, and it should be understood and more widespread in its awareness. But the fact is, that Juneteenth has been there. It didn't just come up, right?
Right.
So now that culture or society or mainstream culture has decided to acknowledge it or learn more about it, doesn't mean that it wasn't there, and doesn't mean that it hasn't been tremendously important in certain cultures, or even certain cities like Milwaukee. I know has always had a tremendously big Juneteenth celebration, right? So I would say the same thing. Like, these audiences have been there, right? And it didn't take this recent kind of flood of content that's developed and targeted towards multicultural audiences to invent those audiences. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Fox, when it was a new network, tapped into the same audiences. The CW or the WB or whatever it was called at that point tapped into these same audiences.
They opened up a whole new audience compared to what the other broadcast guys are doing, right? It's like, oh my God, look, there's people that will watch stuff about In Living Color or something like that was just a huge hit. But, the old school broadcast guys had never thought about, oh, black people don't watch TV, do they?
Right. So I don't think it's our ability to connect with those audiences. I just think it's much more kind of authentic. We just are those audiences, right? We didn't. I've been at Cashmere for nearly 12 years now. I think I started there when there were 6 or 7 people. We never said, let's go start a multicultural marketing agency. We just walked into a room and people were like, you guys are multicultural. We're like, yeah, sure. Like, okay, great. Like, they're like, do you want to work on this project? And we'd be like, yeah, we're actually very passionate about that project, right? Is it because we were multicultural? Perhaps. Is it because we were relatively young and tapped into culture? Far much more so. The secret to success is delivering for your clients. And that is regardless of your angle or your optimization, you got to deliver, and you got to deliver consistently, again and again and again over time. And at the same time you're delivering consistently to maintain clients, you also have to innovate in the space to stay ahead of trends that are happening. And you also have to gain new relationships with new clients, right? And that doesn't matter what color you are or what type of music you listen to or what kind of car you drive. That's just the space that we're in, right? So although we have these passion areas, there's plenty of projects that we're working on that fall maybe on the fringes of what people think that multicultural agency would fall under. I think that a great example of that is the coverage that we've been fortunate enough to get from an outlet like Ad Age, which in 2019 called us the Multicultural Agency of the Year, but in 2020 put us as one of the agencies to watch. And part of that feedback we got for them is that, like, is Cashmere even a multicultural agency? Just because we have 75% multicultural, does that make you a multicultural agency? Those definitions are changing very quickly right now. And you see them changing in different spaces, even in the music industry, in an industry that I was part of for over a decade. There's been a great push lately to stop calling it urban music or urban music division.
Yes.
Like
it's way overdue.
Music. Yeah, it's music, right? And if you look at the audiences that are purchasing or downloading or streaming them, they aren't even aligned. You wouldn't necessarily consider those audiences urban, right?
Right. It's like the white suburban kids listening to Run DMC or the Beastie Boys, even. I mean,
not a new thing. Again,
not a new
you're
thing.
A student of history. You're a student of history, David. It's Blue Eyed Soul, a generation before that. Like, these things have
Motown. Forgot it. Who was listening to Motown? It wasn't just black folks. I mean, come on.
It was the sound of America and the sound of young America. So,
exactly.
There's definitions and categorizations and stuff. At Cashmere, we've never really worried ourselves too much about that. Again, we're somewhat outsiders. Like, I don't know what some of those categorizations even meant, like, honestly. And we're not driven by those. We were just driven by, hey, there's some projects and some products out here that we're passionate about. We think that we could do something cool with them. It really comes from that fundamental relationship with culture.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you mentioned the streaming services. I'm interested. Just Hollywood's going through a really epochal transformation now. We've seen what's going on. You mentioned briefly the Universal premium VOD stuff, and their deal with AMC last week was part of that. The rise of all these streaming services that are subscription services. I see from my Forbes contacts that today NBC Universal is beginning some layoffs to refocus that big media company more on streaming. So I think we're going to see a lot of that throughout Hollywood, actually. There are big changes going on in the agency business too. And in-housing is a big trend. The big companies like PwC are buying up a bunch of agencies and creative outlets. What's all that mean for you guys and for the agency business in general?
Well, I think that the agency business in general has gotten a lot more front-facing, whereas for years it was kind of a behind-the-scenes thing. Like, I watched Mad Men. I liked Mad Men, and that was the agency business, although fictionalized. There was a lot of truth in it from a few generations back, right, or a couple maybe a generation back, depending on how old you are. But these places have always been behind the scenes. But the concept of an agency has really changed, and the concept of a marketer has changed as well, and the concept of a content creator has changed. When you have, Kanye West launched an agency, Puff had an agency at one point. I think he still does. The barriers of entry are much lower, right? You can have an agency and not have any relationship to buying billboards or bus benches, or you might not be buying media time on primetime network TV. But it doesn't mean that you can't be just as effective and have just as much impact and excitement around what you're pushing out there, right? So I think in the case of some of the big entities that you name, when they feel like change is coming, luckily they open the treasure chest and they just buy the change, right?
We buy the change.
We haven't been that fortunate. So we just try to stay ahead of the change and embrace the change. Our tagline at Cashmere is embrace the Renaissance, right? So just like, hey, this is a part of it, let's stay ahead of it. And because we come in with that rhythm and that cadence, we're lucky to stay ahead of it. But the agency space is changing. The marketing and advertising space is changing. I mean, what role does Facebook and ads play in a marketing campaign this day and age, a very effective marketing campaign? And then you're talking about the issues around privacy and politics that are rearing its head at a place like Facebook, right? Which wasn't even necessarily an outlet that to consider for media spend just a few years ago, right? So it's changing. It'll continue to change. That's why, again, we have embraced the concept of change.
All right. So real quickly, Laura, could you put up the poll results? Yeah, there we go. So real quickly, let's see, how many influencer campaigns have you been part of, or your company's been part of? About 3 and 7 say fewer than 5, and about a third say none. So, but about a quarter say it's a regular part of our business. So that's interesting. How many experiential marketing campaigns? I think that's been a big trend in the last few years, is experiential marketing. If you ever go to San Diego Comic-Con, at least before this year, experiential campaigns were everywhere there, and not just in the exhibitions hall, but across the street in the Gas Lamp District and so many other conferences and beyond. Fewer than 5, 43%, so more than 2 in 5 people have done fewer than 5 experiential things, but then about 1 in 6, 17% say it's a regular part of our business. So there's some hardcore people doing that a lot, and then there's a somewhat bigger chunk that don't do it very much at all. How soon before we have regular experiential marketing and other live in-person events again? We're already here, says about 1 in 8. Within 6 months, says another 1 in 5 of you, but about 40%, almost 45% say 6 months to a year. And finally, how many sneakers do you have? 53% are not like Ryan Ford. They do not have a sneaker wall. It's quite clear. But and nobody's going to confess to having a sneaker issue, having a sneaker problem, which I think is, the first step to dealing with your problem is acknowledging you have a problem. So, but
Right.
we do have 3% with 25 pairs to 100 pairs. So that, I don't know if that counts does that count as a problem, Ryan? If you got 75 pairs, or is that just like warming up?
I mean, I knew I started having a problem when I would have to pay extra luggage fees to bring a bag with me just to carry my shoes, right? So my wife and I had our first kid, our daughter Faven, 6 months ago. And
Congratulations.
and I can slowly see the focus area shifting. My priorities are shifting now. And also quarantine makes it having a bunch of sneakers I get worthless to some level, unless I can do more of these video chats and show them off. I'm sure not showing them off walking around town with them on my feet.
It's not doing you any darn good whatsoever. It's true. I mean, about all. I mean, I actually early on in the Let's Do Lunch series, I think I did a thing with was it Dan Weinstein, the head of Studio 71, and I think they were no, actually it was a guy from Complex. I can't remember. Some of the as so much happens, these things kind of smear together, but it was Complex actually, the head of Complex, and they had sneaker stuff, and they had to figure out how to produce. Obviously during lockdown, and they started doing sneaker battles between their staff members, and each of them would trot out, who's got the, the rarest Air Jordan, model or whatever, and they would each bring them out and they would do it online, and there was a judge, and another one of the staff members would judge them, which is I thought was a pretty clever way to make the most
of the game show I'll watch.
Yeah, exactly. You are the target audience right there. So I wanted to do one last bit of prognostication on your part. What does Hollywood, what does the entertainment business and your part of it look like on January 1st, 2022? What's going to be going on? Where's the business heading? What does it look like? And how is it reshaped because of the pandemic, because of the shifts in the search for racial justice and representation, and all the other issues that are going on, political shifts, et cetera, et cetera. What does it look like when we get to 2022?
Yeah, I think a big focus of ours over the past, just serendipitously, like I said, we were ready already, so we didn't have to get ready, is we had come into this space from a very different path. And therefore, it took us a long time to understand that the thinking that drove our social team, the thinking that drove our PR team, the thinking that drove our experiential team is number one, a part of and inherent to the successes in those divisions, but also had a unique value in and of itself. And so we've worked really hard to build out our capabilities in a number of areas, but no more than strategy, right? And really building out our strategy team. We brought in a young woman to head our strategy team named Christina Jenkins, and has really, from an agency-wide perspective, focused on the thinking behind how we attack these problems, how we step up to these challenges, and how we are able to help our brand partners, our network partners, our studio and streaming partners, our political partners, our celebrity partners, navigate a space that is changing. So we have recently doubled down in that area and invested in analytics capabilities. We've launched a new suite of services that we call Dope Data System, DDS, right? Which isn't just like gut reactions to what's going on. It's a system of digital dashboards and frameworks and analytics understanding that help us get to these points as well. Sometimes you just know something's dope because you see it and you're like, that's dope. Unfortunately, that doesn't always translate to the powers that be, right? So if there's a framework or a dashboard or some numbers or some proprietary way that you can inform these assertions, then that's very helpful for not just our clients, but it's helpful for us. Like take our own ideas and put them through this process to see and perhaps even predict how effective they'll be in the space. So in the areas of strategy, in the areas of analytics and research and insight, that's where we're really beefing up. Not just because we want to, but because that's what we feel like is most valuable for our clients and partners as we near into the future. I feel on some level, Cashmere has always lived in a future state. We've always lived in the year 2042 and beyond. And why I say 2042 is because that's the year that the U.S. Census Bureau says that America will become the minority majority nation, right? We exist in that space right now, right? So the closer we get to 2042, and 2022 is closer than 2020 is to 2042, you follow? The closer we get to really actualizing upon our promise and our North Star.
Okay, so data and strategy investments now, because it's going to be a fast-changing time, impossible to predict. At least get some thinking and some numbers to back up the thinking to help you guide your clients and your own organization. I think with that, we should wrap it up and turn it over to Ned to send us out the door.
Well,
thank you so much. Real quickly, by the way, yeah. You can find me on at David Bloom on Twitter and at David L. Bloom on LinkedIn. Ryan, where can they find you?
I'm easy to find. Ford Ryan, FORDRYAN on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can also go to our website, cashmereagency.com. I see a lot of stuff in the chat area about people looking to reach out. Like, hit us up. Would love to have conversation.
You know how the cold call works, so they can do the same thing, right?
Absolutely.
All right, Ned, take us out the door.
Great to have you on the show, Ryan. David, really appreciate it. We're going to have both of you back to talk about 2042. I think that could be a pretty cool segment.
Yeah.
All right. So tomorrow's show, folks, is our Business of Game show. We have Paulo Perjanian, who is CEO of Embodied. They have a very cool robot called Moxie. He'll be on with Chris Heatherly, former executive at Universal and Disney Games. And they're going to talk about how game engines are for more than just games. So join us tomorrow, noon Pacific. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.